In the early 18th century, the edges of the world were still theory. The Pacific remained a vast, intimidating silence. Geographers were convinced a massive southern continent existed in these parts unknown to balance the north. Finding it was a race for colonial dominance. The man chosen to lead the British effort was James Cook. He wasn't the typical highborn officer. He was a Yorkshire farm boy who had worked his way up from the merchant navy, trading aristocratic connections for a life spent mastering the mathematics of the sea. During the 7 Years' War, Cook's talent for surveying became the Royal Navy's secret weapon. His precise charts of the St. Lawrence River allowed British warships to navigate treacherous northern waters the French thought were impassable, earning him a reputation as the finest navigator in the fleet. In 1768, the Admiralty gave Cook command of the Endeavor. He was tasked with a scientific mission to Tahiti to observe the transit of Venus, joined by elite scientists like the botanist Joseph Banks, whose presence gave the voyage the prestige of a noble intellectual pursuit. But the science was only half the mission. Cook carried a set of sealed secret orders from the Admiralty. Once the astronomical observations were complete, he was to sail south and claim the legendary southern continent for the British crown before rival empires could plant their flags. When the Endeavour reached Tahiti, the friction between two worlds was immediate. The British sailors operated on a rigid system of private property and trade, while the Tahitians viewed the exchange of goods as a social bond of gift-giving. When local islanders took iron equipment, Cook responded with naval discipline, seizing chiefs as hostages to force the return of his gear. Following his secret orders, Cook pushed toward New Zealand. Over months of grueling coastal work, he produced this map, proving that these lands were a pair of islands rather than the northern tip of a massive continent. That precision almost cost him the entire expedition. While charting the Australian coast, the Endeavour struck the Great Barrier Reef. The hull ground against the coral, and as water rushed in, the crew spent a desperate night throwing cannons and heavy stores overboard to float free from the jagged rock. Cook returned to England a hero. He had survived the reef and filled in thousands of miles of previously blank space on the Admiralty's charts, providing the first clear look at the eastern edge of the Pacific. But his maps also revealed a new problem. By proving that New Zealand and Australia were isolated, he had pushed the mystery of the southern continent even further into the frozen latitudes. To find it, he would have to go deeper into the ice. In 1772, Cook returned to the sea aboard the Resolution. This time, his orders were to push so far south that the question of the southern continent would be settled forever, regardless of the weather or the risk. Cook's success relied on Harrison's marine chronometer. By keeping a precise time reference against the constant motion of the ship, this device allowed Cook to calculate his exact longitude, transforming open ocean navigation from dangerous guesswork into a mathematical certainty. Even with the best technology, the conditions were brutal. The Resolution crossed the Antarctic Circle into a world of freezing gales and towering icebergs that dwarfed the ship, pushing the crew to the limits of human endurance in the absolute isolation of the Deep South. Cook's persistence finally killed the myth. He proved that if a southern continent existed, it was a frozen wasteland, far too cold and desolate to support the wealthy civilizations the European powers had imagined. As the expedition returned to the warmer Pacific Islands, the strain began to show. Cook's interactions with indigenous cultures grew more aggressive. He resorted to merciless floggings for minor thefts and showed little of his previous patience when local chiefs failed to understand European maritime laws. By the end of the Second Voyage, the geography was conquered, but the man was fraying. Between his failing physical health and the constant pressure of cultural collisions, the legendary discipline that had defined Cook's rise was starting to break. Retirement didn't suit Cook. One final mystery remained: the Northwest Passage. If a route existed over the top of North America, it would shorten the journey between the Atlantic and Pacific by thousands of miles, handing the British an insurmountable trade advantage. But the James Cook who sailed in 1776 was in no condition for the Arctic. He was physically sick, suffering from agonizing stomach pains, and commanding a ship that had been poorly refitted and leaked through its seams. He pushed north past Alaska to the Bering Strait, reaching 70 degrees north before hitting a solid, impenetrable wall of sea ice. There was no way through. The realization that the Northwest Passage was a dead end was a crushing blow. With the Arctic winter closing in, Cook was forced to turn his exhausted and disillusioned crew south to Hawaii to wait for spring. The ice did more than block his route. It exhausted a captain who was already battling chronic pain and a frayed temper. This failure ended his remaining patience, leaving his crew to face a commander who was now as volatile as the seas he wrapped. In Hawaii, the initial welcome was reverent, with the islanders treating Cook as a manifestation of the deity Lono. But when a broken mast forced the Resolution to return unexpectedly to Kealakekua Bay, that goodwill evaporated. The Hawaiians grew wary, sensing that these foreigners might never actually leave. On the morning of February 14, 1779, a stolen boat pushed Cook over the edge. Abandoning his former diplomacy, he led an armed group into the village, attempting to abduct the high chief, Kalananiopu, to use him as a hostage. The islanders realized the danger to their chief and fought back. In a chaotic clash in the shallow surf, Cook was overtaken and killed. His death was a violent end to a life spent trying to impose mathematical order on an unpredictable world. While Cook was buried at sea, his charts were sent back to London. These documents provided the exact coordinates the British Admiralty needed to turn the Pacific from a collection of rumors into a network of secured naval bases and trade routes. The maps triggered immediate interest from rival empires. Within a decade, the Pacific was no longer an uncharted void. It had become a theater where European powers competed for dominion, using Cook's precision to find and claim every island he had marked. Cook's ultimate legacy is a paradox. He replaced centuries of maritime myth with verified coastline, but in doing so, he drafted the blueprints for a century of exploitation and colonization across the indigenous Pacific.